dogs have been used for centuries by indigenous people, when they had contact with them for the first time, all the way up until modern times as of right now. It wasn't up until World War II that the military actually viewed a dog as a viable resource during military campaigns. You know, even polar exploration was made possible by using sleds fashioned like these, like this toboggan sled and the sprint sled, that actually allowed the explorers to pack the gear needed to go further than they had gone before. What made that possible were the engines that drove the sleds, those being the dogs. Come here, buddy. Boy. You know, but sadly, back in those days, a lot of times dogs were just viewed upon as just being tools. They weren't necessarily taken care of very well, and some of them suffered abuse at the hands of the people that were supposed to care about them and love them. Now, buds, we know today, though, that if you're a well-seasoned handler and you take care of your animals, that those animals will take care of you while you're out in the bush as much as you're supposed to take care of them when you're sitting at home. Right, pal? Well, let's talk about the very first thing that people think about when you talk about dog travel and using a dog for work. Let's talk about dog sledding. I'm going to show you two types of sleds. I'm going to show you the toboggan sled, which is the larger sled, which you can carry more gear. It also lends itself very well to deeper snow because of the fact that the runners do not sink into the snow. And then I'm going to show you the sprint sled, which is actually made more popular for sprint runners and racers because they travel better on packed trails. And they're used for speed, not so much carrying the gear. Let's start off with the toboggan sled first. Hi, buddy. This is a 6-foot toboggan sled. And the reason why that it actually gets its name is because if you look here on the bottom, there's only about an inch between the bottom of the sled and the runners themselves. This way it actually helps you ride on top of the snow if you have a deeper snow condition. It has a large sled bag that's attached to it, and this is where you would hold all of your gear that's vital to you and your dog while you're going out there, whether it be winter camping or whether or not you're running a trapline team. And you would put all your gear on the inside. Also, if you look here in the back of the sled, there's a driver's bag where he can keep his personal effects that he needs, some snacks, some dog snacks, and things of that nature. We do need a way to stop our dogs, so what we have back here is a big claw brake. And that'll help you slow your sled down. When riding on the sled, on a toboggan, we're in the back. Alright? And you can see that the runners extend further back, but yet are not too far. This is to give better control. You have to remember you have a lot of weight in the sled generally, and you want to have the weight more or less lifted up. And it makes it easier for the dogs to have the weight shifted backwards to help pull so that the front end doesn't dig into the snow or drag per se. If you look right there, you'll see a series of lashings on the sled itself as it runs down the rail, down here, and here. Alright, that construction is known as mortise and tenon. Alright, not too many sled makers actually do that anymore. Again, if you know anything about me and watching my videos, you know that I am pretty much a traditionalist. And when I elected to buy my sleds, I went to the one person that still continued to maintain a traditional tied sled. Okay? The construction of the sleds, both the sleds, are ash. It's steam bent, you know, to get your curves. Each piece that has a curve in it was steam bent and was put into a jig or a frame to achieve those bends. That master craftsman is somebody who has passed on now, and his name is Ed Moody. If you look him up on the internet, you'll probably get his bio and how long that he built sleds. A little bit of history behind this sled, and the one that's behind it, which is known as an A-frame Sprinter that was made by Ed. This sled right here is the actual last toboggan sled he made before he passed on. 2 weeks after I took delivery of this sled when I was in New Hampshire, Ed actually fell and broke his hip and subsequently, passed on. The Sprint sled, which we're going to talk about now, is probably about 60 years old. And although I don't run sled dogs anymore, I have this sled. I actually have 2 Sprint sleds right now that are left over that I won't ever get rid of. Okay? They mean that much to me. And although, again, that I don't run sleds anymore and dogs, there's still mementos to keep those memories alive for me. So let's move on to the Sprint sled. As you can see here, the Sprint sled, this is where the bed of the sled is on the Sprint sled. Notice that there's about 8 inches of difference in clearance between that. But if you look here, there's no bottom. There's just 2 runners, right? What that actually winds up doing is it makes the sled very light and very maneuverable. That sled, the toboggan sled, weighs about 45 pounds. This sled here weighs about 25 pounds. It's not heavy at all. When you pick it up, it's just cumbersome, but it's not heavy. Again, I have a sled bag, which actually accommodates the equipment that I need to bring. And I have a driver's bag in the back. Now, something that both these sleds share in common is how we keep our dogs attached to the sled. And what we have is very simply known as a gang line. And this gang line is the center line that runs up through and holds all the dogs to the sled. In the back here, we actually have a shock absorber to lessen the load when the dogs go out to pull. They're not pulling on something that's hard and rigid. It's something that will give, okay? In my heyday, I ran a team of 5 dogs. I had 1 leader, and I had 2 wheel dogs, and then the 2 tuggers, as I like to call them, which were the 2 middle dogs. Each dog was held together to the gang line by a tug line. So your center line is the gang line. And your tug that went to each dog was known as the tug line. That'll be important to you when we discuss another way of using dogs to pull sleds. We have a different type of brake. Again, it's still a claw brake. It's right here. It'll dig into the snow. When you're actually standing on a sled, whether it be a Sprint sled or whether it be on the toboggan sled, when your feet are on the runners, okay, the sled is flexible, which is another reason why I chose to go with an Ed Moody sled. Okay, as you can see, it moves. Those movements alone act just like a luge, and you shift your weight on the runners to help steer the sled. You give your dogs the commands and they'll follow the trail After that, it's up to you to control the sled. So now we're going to talk about one vital piece of gear that the dog needs, and that would be a harness. This harness right here is a small sprinting harness. It's known as an H-back. And the reason why it's an H-back is that when it comes off the collar, you can see the piece of webbing going across. It's an H-back. It runs down the long axis of the dog's spine. It doesn't have a lot of padding. It does have some. Some mushers prefer not to have any padding, although I wouldn't know why. And the padding extends basically from the dog's breastbone, the sternum, and runs all the way up along his ribs. So it's going to come up through here and then go to his back. When I start training a dog to run, what I'll do is at a young age I will put a small harness like this, a sprint harness on this, to actually let him get used to using a harness. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to show you primarily a harness that you should consider using if you're going to be doing freighting, carrying the heavier loads, and especially if you're going to be using a toboggan per se to carry your gear. This next harness that I'm going to show you is actually the harness that I would recommend if you're going to be pulling heavier loads, and more specifically, you don't even have to worry about dog sledding, but if you're going to use a toboggan that you can put your gear on and let the dog help and have him pull it, you're going to want something with a lower point of attachment. And what I mean by that is this spreader bar allows the harness not to collapse on the dog's legs. So while he's pulling, if my hands are the back legs, the harness itself will not collapse in once it's attached to the load. If you take a look at the collar is very wide. It's 1.5 inch webbing. With the padding, it makes it about 2¼ inches, 2½ inches. Runs all the way down his sternum. Okay, and then it'll stop. Then it will split at his ribs. So it never really comes in contact with his ribs. Sizing a harness. Well, both these harnesses, actually from the company that I got them from, most harness companies go by the dog's weight and the type of dog they are. They will give you specific instructions on how to measure your dog and what to look for, because sometimes different companies have different measurements for their dogs. The one measurement that will be the same is they're probably going to tell you to get a neck measurement. So you're going to go around the circumference of his neck. And again, you're going to want to know his or her weight. One of the reasons that this freighting harness is so good is because it's adjustable. There isn't any piece of this harness that I can't adjust except for the collar or the circumference around his neck. Other than that, if he gains weight or loses weight, I can make this harness, thinner, longer, however. You can change the width of it. Give a quick, brief little demonstration on actually how to put a harness on. To put a harness on, what I actually like to do is I like to gather it up and put everything out to the side so I have his collar. I will step over him. If he wants to sit, that's fine. I'll put the harness around him. Just turn it with me, buddy. Turn it with me, buddy. There you go, pal. Good boy. All right, now you'll see, here's the sternum strap. I usually keep him on lead anyway while doing this. Make sure his collar is not underneath the collar of the harness. Now it's just very simply, another thing that you need to get your dog acclimated to is picking up his paws. So, reach in from the harness, pull him up, boom. There's one, boom, there's two. And he would be ready to go and set to tie up to a sled and go on his way. Boy, good boy. Always remember to praise your dog if he does something good, okay? That's what you're talking about. You want him to know that he's pleasing you, and you want to make sure that you please him as well. It's a good way to keep a dog happy.